Hey guys, hope you're doing good. In this video, we are going to learn about inheritance. Inheritance is the process of acquiring the property of one class inside another class whenever it is required. Now, one more thing I just want to say, you can use inheritance only when there is a is-a relationship. When you don't have is-a relationship, don't ever go for inheritance. Maybe like you can inherit anything from anything syntactically, but conceptually it is wrong. For example, I have a class already existing class called as person. Right? I have a perfectly working class called as person, and it has some properties like name, age, address, phone number, all these things. Right? Now I want to create one more class called as employee. Right? So when I say employee, he is a person who is working in a company, right? So when I say employee, he will also be having a name, age, address, phone number. Apart from this, he have something special that's called as ID, salary, department name, all those things. Now when I say like I'm going to create this employee class with some properties, that is name, age, phone number, all those things, and along with that ID and other things, I know that there is already a class which is perfectly working, which has some properties called as like name, age, address, and then phone number, right? So these are the properties of person class. And like this the properties of what should be the properties of employee class? Like it should be ID, again the name, age, phone number, everything will come, right? So these things will also come for employee, right? And then apart from that, you will be having department, salary. Now here you can see this name, age, phone number, all these things are getting repeated, which is already there in my perfectly working class employee. Now instead of doing this all over again, what I can do is I can simply inherit the person class inside employee class with the help of inheritance. So when I do that, I'll go for inheritance. Now here if I say this is a perfect is a relationship, employee is a person, right? So I'm acquiring the properties of person class inside employee class. So there is a relationship between employee class and person class. Now this is a perfect example for is a relationship. Now here this person class is called as the base class, right? And the employee class is called as the derived class. Now let me give you the syntax or the structure of inheritance. For example, if I have a class like this called as base, let me have pass inside. And if I want to inherit the properties of this class inside the new class, I'll just say class, let me use derived, and then say within parentheses I'll be giving base. Now this is how I inherit the properties of one class inside another class. Now the properties of this class will get inherited inside this class. Now it means that from here I can access all the properties of the base class without any problem except the private properties, right? So everything will get inherited except the private, because as we have seen earlier in other videos, right, I have explained you what is private, right? So when I say private variables can be accessed only by the members of the class, not by anyone else, right? So this relationship is called as is a relationship. So whenever I want to access the properties of one class inside another class, I'll be giving the class name within parentheses like this. Got it, guys? Okay. So let us directly go for some example. And before that, I just want to tell you that base and derived are not keyword. It's just the class name that I've given here, right? And one more thing, if I want to create any object, I'll be creating object for the derived class and not for the base class. If I create object for the derived class, I can access all the properties of the base class also. But when I create object for the base class, I cannot touch the derived class properties. So it is better that we create object for the derived class. Okay. So this is how this is the structure of your inheritance, right? So whenever I inherit something, I inherit the properties of the base class inside the derived class, and I create object for the derived class. With the help of derived class object, I can access all the properties of base class except the private properties. Got it, guys? This type of inheritance is called as single inheritance because I am acquiring the properties of one class inside another class. So it is dealing with only one class. So this type of inheritance is called as single inheritance. Now we have one more type of inheritance that's called as multiple inheritance. Right. So when I say multiple inheritance, it acquires the properties of more than one class. Now here we acquire the properties of one class inside another class. The multiple inheritance helps us to acquire the properties of more than one class. So let me say class, I'll say base 1, I'll say class base 2, class derived. Now here, if I want to acquire the properties of both the classes, I'll say base 1 comma base 2. So this type of inheritance is called as multiple inheritance. If I want to acquire the properties of more than one class inside my new class, then this type of inheritance is called as multiple inheritance, right? Now let us see some example to understand inheritance better. Now I have a class called as person. Inside that I have from 4 variables, that is first name, last name, address and phone number, and I have 2 methods. So with that I'm going to get and print the values, right? So I have a method called as setPer where I'm going to get the inputs, and I'm going to use the method called as getPer where I'm going to print all the details. Now let me create an object called as per, and then say person. I have an object is created. So once an object is created, immediately init method will be called, and 4 variables will be created and initialized to none and 0 respectively. And I say per dot setPer where I'm going to call this method to get inputs, and I say per dot get per. This method is called to print all the values. Now let me run this code for you. Now it's asking for the first name, because like what's happening here, I'm creating an object. After creating an object, I'm calling the method setPer where it has the first input, like it's asking for the first name, right? So let me type first name, and it's asking for the last name here. That is what it's here, right? I'll say Edison. And then it's asking for the address. I'll say India, and then say phone number. Let me give some 10-digit number, and then press enter. So once I press enter, it is printing all my output, because after getting the input, I'm calling the method getPer with which prints the value. Now if this is for just a normal class which has a person details, right? If I want to create information about an employee, what will I do? So if I want to create information about an employee, I may need to create a class called as employee, or I may need to go and change this. Like I don't want to touch this. So let me create a new class called as employee. So let me say it's not required for me now. Let me create a class called as employee here, right? So now here, instead of creating a new class employee with first name, last name, address, because everything is required for an employee, as I said already, I can inherit all the properties of the person class inside my employee class. That is what I'm going to do. So what will I say? I'll say class employee person. So when I do this, all the properties of the first person class will get inherited, right? All the properties of the person class will get inherited. What are the properties now? Let us see. So the properties of the first class are first name, the last name, and the address, and finally phone number, right? So these are the properties that will get inherited as it is. So it is not required for me to create new variables called as first name, last name, and address explicitly. So what I can do, I can just say employee, right? So employee, here I have employee ID, I say salary and email. So it is enough for me to create what are the specialization that is required for my employee class. One more thing I would like to tell you, right? So the base class, or the where it is getting inherited from, this is called as this is called as base class. Let me write it first for you. I'll say base. So where it is getting inherited, right, is called as the base class. Where it is getting inherited to, that's called as the derived class, right? So person class is getting inherited to employee class. That's the reason employee class is called as derived class, and person class is getting inherited to somewhere. That's why it is called as base class. Now this base class is also known as generalization. Derived class is also known as specialization. Now why this is called as generalization and why this is called as specialization, right? So whenever I am inheriting something from here, these are the general properties that can be inherited to any place. But when I say employee, the employee ID, salary and email are something specific and specialized to this class. That's the reason this class the derived class is also known as specialization, right? So I'm specific to something, right? That's the reason it's called as specialization. Now here I'm just getting input for employee ID, salary, and email in setEmp method, and in getEmp method I'm just printing it as it is, right? So as I said already, to create an object, we'll be creating an object for the employee and not for the person class. That is for the derived class and not for the base class. So it's enough to create an object for the derived class. So when I create an object for the derived class, along with ID, salary, and email, first name, last name, address, and phone number will also get created. Okay, fine. Let us see how to call the methods. So let me say get, or yeah, setEmp method, and then say emp dot getEmp method, right? So when I do this, what will happen? When the setEmp method is called, it will come and get input for ID, salary, and email. So what about first name, last name, and address? If I try to get it here, let's say self dot first, right? So when I say self dot first, it is an error because this first name is a private property of the base class, which you cannot use it in the derived class. It will get inherited but cannot be accessed, right? Private properties can be accessed only by the method members of the class, right? I can use set per to call the to get input for or to do access this person, right? So if I want to access any of these variables which is present inside my base class, that two private variables, I can use only the members, right? I cannot use a non-member, right? I cannot use an outsider to do it. So even though it is getting inherited, I cannot access the private properties of the base class. So instead, what I can do is I can just say emp dot, I'll say set per. I can do this because set per is a method that is not a private method, right? So private method cannot be called, right? Any private variables or private data cannot be accessed outside, but the public members or public data can be accessed. So I can call the set per method with the help of emp object because it is getting inherited, right? So when it's getting inherited, I can access all the members except the private. Everything can be accessed except private. So I can use set per and then set emp, and finally I can say emp dot get per and get emp, right? So let me run this code for you. So when I run this code, it's asking for the name. Let me say Samuel Edison. I'll say India, and phone number. Let me give the phone number and email ID. I'll say sam.eddy@email.com, and then oops. Okay, so for ID I've given, for ID I've given email ID. I'm sorry, that's my mistake. So let me clear the screen for you. Let me do it again. So I'll say Samuel Edison, address is India. I'll say phone number, and then ID. This is not email ID, that's employee ID 123, and salary. Let me give some amount, and then email. I'll say sam.eddy@email.com, right? So after getting everything, it's printing, right? It's printing the first name, last name, last name, address, and phone number from the person class, and then getting the details of employee ID, salary, and email from the employee class. Got it? Now let us make some small change, right? This email, usually, like when you go to companies, when you join an organization, your email ID will be combination of your first name and last name with the company's official ID. So when I say input, it's it's like it doesn't look nice. So let me try to get this first name and the last name, and then try to create an email for me, right? So to get the email, and also like one more thing that I want to make some changes, that it's printing the first name and last name. So let me create one more variable called as full name, or let me give it as just name, right? I'll say name as none. Now your name will be first name followed by the last name with a space in between, right? So how will I get, right? I should not get any input for that again, because the first name is and last name is already got, and I want to create the name. I need to create the full name. To do that, I'll say self dot name. Since I know the first name and last name, let me say self dot underscore first plus self dot underscore last. Now I'm just concatenating these two strings and making it as a new string. Now here if I do this, this will not by default take space. So I need to include a space in between and then concatenate it. So what I've given here is that I'm just concatenating a space. I'll say first name, concatenating with a space, and then concatenating with the last name. Okay, got it? Fine. So let me go here to create the email, right? So email, instead of getting the email, I can just say, I'll say first, I have to say self dot first, and then let me say a dot, and then concatenate with self dot last, and then I'll concatenate with at email.com, right? So when I do this, what will happen? It will say first, it will take the first name, it will take the last name, put a dot in between and concatenate with the email. But unfortunately, my first name and last name are private variables. So private variables from the base class cannot be accessed here. So what should I do? For that, I can use two methods. Let me say def first name, or let me say just first, and then say self, and from here I'm going to return my first name. How will I do it? I'll say self dot underscore underscore first, right? And then let me say def last, and then say self. From here I'm going to return self dot last, right? So any private variable is there and you want to access it somewhere else, it is better to put in a method and return the private variable outside, right? Or wherever it is getting called. Now I can access it, but I cannot change or modify it, right? I can only access it. So instead of using what is that, self dot first, it is not possible. I'll just say self dot first of, and then self dot last of. Now it's going to call the method, right? So what it's going to call when it comes here, self dot first, it calls the method and returns the first name. First name will get replaced here. Now here this calls the last method, and here the last name will be returned back and then concatenated, or it will be joined. Got it, guys? Okay, so let me run this code for you. First of all, let me save it and then run the code for you. So first let me clear the screen so that you will get a clear view and understanding. Let me run this code. So let's say first name is Samuel, last name is Edison, and address I'll put India, phone number, and then employee ID, let me say salary. Now I didn't give the full name, I didn't give anything, it just got me the first name, right? So first name dot last name at email.com. Now here instead of printing the first name and last name, I can just go ahead and print the full name alone, right? I don't have to give the first name and last name separately. I'll just go and print the last name only, right? So I'll say name here and then say name. Okay, so let me save this and clear the screen for you. Okay, let me run the code. I'll say Samuel Edison, address I'll say India, then phone number, let me give a 10-digit number, employee ID, salary, oops, okay, forgot to give that. That's a typo error, nothing to worry. Let me run it again. So if you give it as a private variable, make sure that you're not missing the double underscore as I did here, right? We tend to do that mistake, right? Many times we tend to do that mistake. We miss out the variable name. So like make sure that if it is a private variable, make sure you're giving double underscore preceding it. So I've just given only here. I've missed in 2 places. That's the reason it was showing error. That's okay, fine. So let us do it. Let me say Samuel Edison, and then given the phone number, employee ID, salary. Now see, the input what I got is here, right? I got the input for the first name, last name, the address, phone number, employee ID salary. I got in the output for the full name, right? So Samuel space plus Edison, which I've concatenated here, right? So here I am just concatenating the first name and last name and making a new name called as a new full name called as name. And then here I am creating a email ID with the help of the first name and the last name, a dot in between, concatenating those two, and then at the end with the email address, right? Hope you got it, guys. Okay, now this is for just for one employee, right? If I want to have more than one employee, you cannot say that a company can have only one employee. A company can have more than one employee. Now how will I do it? That is what we are going to see now. Okay, let me do it for you. To create more than one employee, let me create first a list. EMP, I'm creating a list. This is an empty list. This is an empty list. Now here, after creating the empty list, let me get n, that is say ints input. Let me say enter the number of employees, right? This is where I'm going to get the number of employees. Now if I want to get the number of employees that is more than one employee, let me use a for loop. I'll say for I in range of n, right? And then I'm going to create first like objects, right? This is an empty one. Now I have to create an object. So let me say emp dot append of, I'm going to create employee every time. So let me put employee here. So now an object will be created and it will be put inside the emp list, right? So every time an object will be created, once object is created, it will be there inside my emp list. Now how will I get input for this? Let me first get input for you. I'll say emp of I, right? That's how you use the index to access it, right? So emp of I, and then use it, right? So after getting all the input, I can print it in range of n, and then say emp of I, that is the employee information, emp of I, right? Done. So let me break this, clear the screen for you. Now here I'm going to get some n employee information, and then I'm going to print all the details. So let me say print employee info. So let me give one more space so that we can get a clear understanding of what's happening, right? So you understood, or else I'll just repeat again. Please listen once, right? So to create more than one employee, first I need to create an empty list, and then I'm going to get number of employees with a variable n. And after doing that, like I'm using a for loop to create objects, that is n objects. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying append and employee. Now what will happen? A new object will be created and will be appended into the list emp. So every time an object will be created and it will be appended into the list emp. Now here I am using emp of I, that is indexing, that is 0th position. That's the first object. For first object I am getting input. Next time I will become 1, that will be emp of 1. For second object I will be getting input. So every time I create an object, append it to my list and creating a list of object, right? So after creating as and when I create a list of object, I am getting inputs, and then finally after doing all those things I'm just printing and seeing, right? So let me run this code for you. Oops, it's showing some error. Let me see, what is that? Okay, I missed a parenthesis here. That's it, nothing big. Let me run it again. Okay, so it's asking for number of employees. Let me say 2. So when I say first name, it's Samuel, second name, that is Edison, and address, I'll say India. Then phone number, let me give a phone number, employee ID 123, salary, let me give 9,000, and it's asking for the first name again, right? So next person I'm getting input for, let it be Jordan, and then the last name Blossom, India. Let me give some phone number, let it be 124, salary, let it be 8,000. Now you're getting all the employee inside your company, right? That is the first person is Samuel Edison, is from India. phone number, employee ID, salary, and his email, right? So I'm the second person is Jordan Blesson. Address is India, phone number, employee ID, salary, and email. This is how I do it. Got it, guys? Okay. Now, one thing that I want to tell you right here, from here, like when I create an object, right? When I create an object, unfortunately, only the init method of the derived class will get called, right? So init method of the derived class will get called. The init method of the base class will never get called. So how should I call it? That is what I'm going to tell you, because it is very important to, as of now, it is not required. Like we didn't find any problem because we are initializing it here. It is creating, the variables are getting created here only, right? So let me put a print statement here. I'll say print, just for understanding. I'll say employee class init method called, right? So let me do the same thing there as well. I'll say person class init method called, right? So let me run this code. Once an object is created, it is already understood that what the constructor must be called, right? So when I run this code, you can see number of employees, right? It's asking for number of employees. Let me say, I'm sorry, let me say 1 here. So when I say 1, you can see only the employee class init method is called, but the base class, that is the person class init method, is never called. But as per the procedure, first the base class constructor must be called and then the derived class constructor must be called. So we need to call it explicitly. In other programming languages like C++, you can see that the base class constructor will be called automatically whenever the execution happens. But here we need to call it explicitly. So I'll say use the method called a super and call the init method explicitly. So make sure that you're calling the init method of the base class explicitly to avoid confusion. So let me run this code for you. You can say like, okay, 1 minute. Let me clear the screen. Run the code for you. Number of employees, let me say 1. So you can see it's perfect now. The person class init method is called and then the employee class init method is called. So this is the procedure that you need to follow whenever you create an inheritance. Make sure that from the derived class constructor, from the derived class init method, you need to call the base class init method explicitly, or else it will never be called. Hope you got it, guys. Okay, fine. So this is what I have to say about single inheritance. Let me explain you about multiple inheritance. Okay. So when I say multiple inheritance, let me say base 1. I'll say def init self. Just let me have a print statement to make you understand what's happening there. I'll say I am inside base 1 init method. Okay, and let me create one more class called as base 2. It will be base 2, and let it say inside base 2 init method, and let me create a derived class for me. I'll say derived, and I'll say base 1 comma base 2. You can give in any order. It is not required that base 1 is first, base 2 is second. You can give it in any order. I'll explain you that as well in short. Now here I'll say derived, right? So here, as we have discussed already, object will be created only for my derived class, right? So when I do this, let us see which constructor is getting called and which is not getting called. That is what we're going to see now. Oops, let me save this. Let me save this code. Okay, you can see I am inside derived class init method. It never called the base class. So we need to call it explicitly to access the base 1 and base 2. Now here previously we have used super method, right, to call the init method of the base class. So when I do super method, let us check like which method is getting called, right? So when I say super method, it went to the base class 1 because that is the first one, right? So it comes the first, so it goes to the base class 1 and then the derived class. But to call these things explicitly, I need to say base 2 dot init method. I can also give here base 1 dot init method. So whenever I'm going for a multiple inheritance, make sure that you are providing both the base classes in the derived class init method to call both the base class init method explicitly, right? So for that, I'll just give the base class names and followed by the init method, right? So let me run this code for you. Now you can see, oops, what happened? Okay, so I may need to pass some self here. I forgot to do that. Now this will work perfectly, right? So if I'm saying super, it is not required for me to pass any argument, but if at all I'm using the class name explicitly, I may need to pass self explicitly. Got it, guys? I'm done with this video, guys. If you have any doubts or queries, please comment in the comment section. I'll definitely get back to you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and do subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.